We're talking today about a whale of a tale. And my question is, was it just a fluke? Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
And your co-host Rich Gear here as well, and we have a special guest here today, Dr. Bergman.
Dr. Jerry Bergman is a profound lecturer, professor, and writer. He is very prolific in his writing, and he's written about 62 books and about 2,200 different articles and papers. And so I think that he has the qualifications to speak on this subject, which is evolution of the whale. Is it credible? Is it something that is convincing? And so, Jerry, introduce yourself a little bit and what you talked about in this book.
Okay, my name is Jerry Bergen, and how did I get interested in this? Well, I went to a American Scientific Affiliation meeting, and they used to be creationists, but now they're evolutionists, and so they've switched, and so they're pretty hostile towards the creationists. But one of the speakers there was a professor of zoology, I guess, and he said the main evidence, the best evidence for evolution is the evolution of whales, of humans, and of horses. And I thought about that, and that's the best evidence of evolution, period. And so I looked into the literature, and did an article a while ago on whales. It's pretty clear that we had an animal that looked like a dog. It wasn't actually a dog, but it looks like a dog. They evolved into a whale. And they have lots of intermediate animals between those two. And researching each of these intermediates, what they're doing is they're finding in the fossil record animals that kind of looked like, in some ways, a whale. They were big, was a key. And therefore they said, well, this must be a link. Of course, the fact is, all you have is a lot of broken bones. You don't have any evidence that there's a link. You don't even know if any of those critters had any kids, period. And so, therefore, you don't know that they indeed produced a different species or differences, and eventually those differences evolve into a whale. The key is the size difference. Why they got onto this originally was Darwin basically said that I see no problem in an animal as small as, I think he used the word fox, but like that, evolving into a monstrous whale. The size is one thing, but there are many, many other differences. Whales, as people don't really think about, are mammals, and therefore they have to live in the water, and therefore they're not fish, they're mammals. The differences between fish and whales are so great that the evolutionists decided to utilize a animal that was a mammal. And that's where the mammal idea came from. And one thing that's important when you are studying evolution is that they wear evolution glasses. They see evidence, which I see a bunch of broken bones. And I see a long animal, looks kind of like a snake. I see an animal that looks, well, not anything like a whale, but had some traits like a whale. And therefore they take these animals because they have their evolution glasses on and they say, well, these must be the missing link to a whale. Now, of course, you don't know that. That can't be known because you don't know anything about the families and the changes that were made in order to become a whale. But on the other hand, they're there, and therefore I decided in this book to critically evaluate the propriety of using these different animals as an ancestor of a whale. And I could mention that the scholarly literature is not in full agreement. So the paleontologists, the scholars, say that indeed, yes, this could be an ancestor of a modern whale, but there are problems. And so I didn't have to look at every detail and scrutinize it. I simply looked at a lot of the literature done by scientists, evolutionists, that point out indeed that this progression from a dog to a whale is not very feasible at all. And there are many, many differences that have to occur before a dog can live in the water. And that's something you never really answer. There are so many changes that we're talking about a whole different animal to allow indeed the whale to be produced. But on the other hand, again, they see the world through these evolution glasses. I think they distort the world you have to look at the way the world really is, and they're not doing that. They're looking at the world through these glasses. And that is a major problem. When you really, really believe in evolution, well, the evolutionary links that they have to be, or some similar links have to be true. But of course, if you look at the creation worldview, none of these have to be true. They're there. You want to study them. You want to find out about them, but you don't have to link them up to a chain, a progression from a dog-like animal into whales. And so also when I studied whales, I was amazed that actually, hard to believe, they can become pets. Now, I have a dog and have cats, and you can give them a hug and so on. A whale as a pet, that's ridiculous. Well, one man gave a story of a whale who got trapped. And it was a baby whale, but it was still, I don't know, still weighed a couple 100 pounds, but a baby whale. And he would come out to see that whale twice, 3 times every day, pet the whale. And the whale came up considerably to be close to him in order to have a relationship with this guy. And of course, he couldn't, do a lot, just pet him. But on the other hand, he petted him and also fed him. And the whale eventually grew large enough they had to let him out of where he was at in the pool. He was in a large pool, but they eventually had to let him out. And the whale comes back periodically to see his friend, and likewise is a kind animal. Also, in doing research on whales, I found out that some animals are mean towards people, period, but whales are rarely mean towards people. Almost all whales, they're curious about people, but they're not mean. They don't attack people like some animals, some sea animals like sharks do. Sharks will attack you if they're not tamed. But whales, on the other hand, naturally seem to be curious about people, but rarely do they attack people. Although they found if whales are hunted, as they used to a long time ago, that the whale will develop a fear of people, and then that whale may, in the water, attack the skin diver who's trying to be with him. But that's been a long time since we hunted whales, and therefore you can easily swim up to them and pet them and look at them, and they'll look at you, and they'll swim away. And I can't say there's never been a attack by a whale on a swimmer, but it's pretty rare that their tuition is to be curious about humans, but not mean. In some cases, they have where whales were protective, and whales would scare away sharks and protect the human diver. So you get a lot of neat stories from looking into the history and the behavior of whales. Again, it's hard for us to see this animal that weighs, 10 tons or 20 tons, to be anything like a dog or a pet. But in many ways, they are. And,
Well, Jerry, I'd like to ask you, what maybe are the top three objections to evolution from this dog-like creature to a whale, and what is the strongest things they use to support it? Maybe the top three of each side. I'm just kind of curious. Your book's probably going to tell all that stuff, but we're going to give the audience a little bit of a teaser campaign here. So
a very good question. Number one, a difference is size, obviously.
Yes.
The brain of a whale, which is comparatively small, is much bigger than a dog. So size is a huge difference. And when an animal becomes larger, you have to change the whole body system, the veins, the arteries, the muscles, the brain, all of this for a whale to do what whales do, number one. Number two, whales are true mammals, but in many ways they're more like fish than they are mammals. And so you have to go from a terrestrial animal living on land to an animal living in the water that's able to survive in the water. And of course, they survive quite well. In fact, the number of whales worldwide is increasing significantly because we have, fortunately, laws that protect them. And because we realize that whales are part of the ecosystem and therefore they need to be protected. So we got the size, that's number one. Number two, they are mammals, but in many ways, their body especially, they have fish traits. They have a streamlined body like no mammal has. They don't have legs. They don't have a number of features that land mammals have. So number one, you have, of course, the size. Number two, you have terrestrial versus swimming versus aqueous. And then three, a difference you have is whales have abilities that, as far as we know, the article Doug sent me, They have the ability to communicate by clicks and noises, and they can communicate with other whales in a way that's totally foreign as far as I'm aware of most animals. Now, some animals can, like porpoises, I believe, but on the other hand, they have a system of communication that's totally different from that of all mammals. So communication, as the article Doug sent me, is helpful. Indeed, that's an incredible ability that they have. And not only do they have this ability, but these sounds they found can travel for hundreds of miles in the water. And they communicate with each other. So if I want to send you a message and you're 10 miles away, no problem. You'll get the message. It may take a week, but you'll get the message. And therefore, that is a trait that no mammal can even come close to. No land mammal can even become close to. So these are a few of the differences, but many. I have a list in my book of the differences, but that's a very good question.
Yeah.
I have
Um,
a kind of a relationship with the whale in my, it was one of the things I talked about in my book, Revolution Against Evolution. And it goes way back to when I was in high school, when I won a science fair project and went on a Navy Science Cruiser award that took me over to Newport, Rhode Island, where we went to the Navy base, and then we also had a chance to visit with the people from Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute out there that were tracking the whales and doing some of the sound, tracking the sounds that the whales made. And so I remembered that, but later on, probably around the same year, I heard a preacher on the radio talk about, how did the nose of the whale or the dolphin get to the back of his head? And that was one of the things that actually woke me up to the idea that there was a creator that uh, put together these creatures rather than, I was, and he talked about how all the different features that would have to change from a land-based creature. You have to lose its legs and develop flippers and fins, and have a means to be able to dive to great depths without getting the bends. And you know, there was a whole list of those things that I have in my book.
One thing I want to talk about that, and unless it's not fashionable or current now in evolutionary circles, but didn't they originally think that everything was sea-based and then it went on land, and so we got a sea-based creature somehow turning into a land animal and then turns back into a sea creature? Isn't that what's isn't that the
Well, that's
popular
what would
comment?
have to happen, in
Yeah, I
order for
mean,
all the mammalian features to develop in an evolutionary sequence. But I like to point out that we have a creator God who has a whole grab bag of different things that he's designed and that works in various instances. And so he takes, when he created things originally, in the original creation. By the way, whales were one of the very first creatures mentioned being created. The great sea monsters and the whales, and so, but it's sort of like a computer programmer using little snippets of code here and there, and to develop a whole package of features that is a unique creation. And so you don't need, in that scenario, common descent. It's a common designer that pulled it all together and makes all these different cetaceans and creatures. So you have a whole bunch of different varieties of cetaceans that you find in the ocean. And so I believe that God, as the creator, has all these features in his grab bag of things that he used in his
the
uh,
celestial toolbox.
celestial toolbox, and he just put them together. And so it makes good sense that if you find common features such as wings and bats, birds, and insects and flying reptiles, that God, when he created things like that, he just used the same design in various places.
Yeah, good point. I think Rick's point is excellent that marine animal evolved into a terrestrial animal, which evolved back into a marine animal.
Yeah,
Why doesn't the marine animal just evolve into a whale? Why go through the terrestrial
I
animal?
know it.
Well, so I thought that was Rich's point was well taken. So,
Thank
but
you.
again, it's like a girl, sweet girl, and she says, "Gee, I'm really lonely. Could you introduce me to a nice man?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I work with hundreds of men. In fact, the best man of all I have, of all the guys I know 60 men. They're all really nice, and I'll take the nicest one and I'll introduce you to him." So you introduce him to her, and she looks at him and says, "Is this the best you?" Just the best you can do. I'll just stay single. And so, in essence, that's what we're doing with the whale. Is this the best you can do? Well, that's the best they can do, and that's not very good,
It's
obviously.
bad, very bad actually. Yeah.
This is the
So.
best you can do in terms of explaining evolution, right?
In
So,
my,
Jerry, what are the three strongest arguments they used to promote this theory, this particular progression? What you said it looks like just a bunch of broken up bones. I mean, what do they propose, or why do they propose this dog-like creature uh, not only became ginormous at some point, but his brain capacity, he's lost his legs, turned into flippers. How do they justify this? Other than the fact that they have nothing else.
well, it's the best solution they have. And you may criticize it, but they say, look, it's the best solution we have. And your solution is God. We can't accept that. So we can only accept a non-theistic solution. So the only solution we can accept is evolution. And yeah, it's not probable, but this is our conclusion. And the issue is too that Darwin came up with this idea first. And
Oh,
therefore, because he started it, and therefore that idea was put in the minds of people, and therefore, probably since Darwin's day, people have been trying to think of ways that a dog-like creature or a bear, I think Darwin mentioned a bear, could evolve into a whale.
it's like whatever. It seems like the old ideas never really totally get lost. I mean, they talk about neo-Darwinism as opposed to classic Darwinism, but because the problem they use mutations and things of that nature. But I still remember reading years ago what Huxley proposed that the bird evolved into the dinosaur because of the claws. Okay, and I go these 1850 ideas, 1870 ideas, they're still around because they have nothing else. They have nothing else, it seems to me. And so they regurgitate old ideas that mostly have been debunked or shown how fallacious they really are. Wouldn't you
Yeah,
say? I mean, that's where I
true.
come to the
But if
conclusion.
I came up with a new theory that whales evolved from a porpoise or another large marine animal, like a, a, a porpoise or a shark, people would say they're not used to that. Their idea is new. And therefore, I would take a lot of evidence for me to try to introduce that into the scientific world. And
Yeah.
indeed, it would. And so, to some degree, they get started on a belief like birds evolved from dinosaurs. They get started on a belief and they tend to go along in that direction. And therefore, they are not able to come up with another idea effectively. Now, sometimes scientists do, but on the other hand, often they don't. And therefore, choice of God or creation, they'll choose creation. Or sorry, choice of God or evolution, they'll choose evolution.
Can
Every
you
time.
tell us
Yeah.
about the different intermediate types that they talk about, like Pakicetus and Ambulocetus?
Yeah, though the earlier ones look more like mammals, more like maybe a deer or a modified deer. And so therefore the earlier ones, and then eventually, of course, in the sequence they have, they've got to lose the legs and they've got to become long animals like Basiosaurus, I think is one, and there's several others that they postulate to. But again, once I looked into each of these, there's just no evidence for it. The many are different. I can mention that mine's the only book, period, that refutes the common whale evolution. And so I'm hoping it'll do really well when it's out. We've got some good people that worked on it. I have several people that worked on it with me very closely. A anatomist who is a MD, by the way, and he's done a lot of good work in this area. And of course, Rich Gere did an excellent job on the covers and some of the drawings. So therefore, hopefully we'll have a good combination and we can indeed become somewhat successful in this book on whale evolution.
Yeah, why is it that nothing has been published on this from a creationist standpoint? Because that seems to me to be the strongest argument for for creation that you can get. And I do remember another book published back in 1967 or so. It was by Herbert W. Armstrong's group, but
Yeah,
called Whale of a Tale, I think it was. But it points out these particular features that I have in my book that you have to have them all work all at once in order for the whales to survive the transition. That's nothing that happens gradually.
yeah, that's a good point. It's got to survive the intermediate stages. So in going from a dog to a whale, it's got to be able to survive through natural selection, the competition in going from a dog to a whale. And that's a problem they've always had. And they just kind of gloss over it and say, well, must have because we've got whales and therefore that's the only explanation. But
Wow. Reminds that story about an animal that was really designed for the water. The snowy, I think it was a snow seal or something like that. And when the Exxon Valdez or one of those tankers got oil all over them, they spent $50,000 trying to restore them. They got them all pristine and really good. You talked about competition. They had this big dedication ceremony. They set him out in the water and he swam away 50 yards from the thing. An orca came in and ate him. So
oh,
by the time that dog evolved into a whale, he might have been eaten 25,000 times. I don't know. I just think about the competition by the transitions, let alone the genetic factors, which if you can't automatically breathe underwater, your lungs have to be developed to do what it is, and especially as a mammal. You know, the capacity of a whale's lungs are immense, from what I understand, and to be able to go from that small little dog-like creature into this whale-like thing. They had to grow lungs, and I mean, it's beyond conceivable. But you're right, Jerry. There was an old, I don't know who said it, Einstein, but it was quoted to me by a guy named Doug and I, Eric Von Fanch, talking. I don't know who said it, but your prejudice allows you what you can see, you know. And they try to put that on you and me to say, well, you're believing in God, therefore you can't see the evolutionary. I says, well, I think it's the other way around. I've been where they were. I
yeah,
was an evolutionist at one time. I know that, and as I've become I become a believer in Christ, and the theistic worldview is the only thing that really makes any sense for spontaneous generation to actually happen. You have to have something come from something, and nothing else makes any sense. Everything in science contradicts evolutionary scenarios. Life from non-life, complexity from simplicity. I mean, increase of genetic information. None of that stuff is verifiable from an empirical looking at the science. You can't see it anywhere. It's a postulate, and it reminds me of that one book cover. That title was "I don't have enough faith to be an atheist." It's almost that. It's almost that bad. But you're
yeah, it
right. They
is.
have nothing else to use to suppress the truth and unrighteousness, I suppose. I can't really understand why else it would be, because it's not the science. It has to be there has to be willful ignorance, willful suppression of the truth to not see the emperor has no clothes.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
It's a good point you made relative to a breath. They have to take a big enough breath to survive under the water for 20 minutes or more. And that's
Yeah.
a lot of breathing. You've got to take in a lot of air, and all they have is a blowhole at the top of their body. And I don't know how in the world they must do it because they're still alive, but you wonder how in the world they take in enough air that they can survive for 20, 30 minutes underwater without having to come. I mean, I can,
And
I,
very deep.
two or
The
three minutes.
pressure, the
Yeah,
pressure
the
that would
pressure.
go against them too. Ah,
But
hmm.
they do it. They survive.
I have this article that I was sent you guys. It is how a whale's dive shapes its song. And the question I would have is if they're finding all this elaborate language that the whale is using in and with the suction cup devices that so about the size of a tablet, and they were able to attach these to whales, and then they were able to track them and hear their different songs and their languages that they use. Apparently, it differs depending upon where the whale is in the depth of the ocean, and so they were finding that some whales repeated the songs continuously up to 16 hours without stopping. And more importantly, the recording song elements, the ones as themes, lined up consistently with specific portions of a dive. Now, here's a question. If we are very adept at translating our own languages, why can't we actually translate the languages, birds and whales and the different creatures around us that seem to be a mystery? We know that they vary and do different things, but why can't aren't we adept enough scientifically to discern all these different languages that the animals use?
That's an excellent point, and you can see how difficult it is because why one whale sends a message to another whale 5 miles away,
Mm.
and the whale responds. How do you know which whale is message being sent to? And how do you know totally what caused their behavior to change? Although that's one way, when they send a message to a whale 3, 4 miles away and they change in a certain way, they can get some hints. But how they can, as you brought up well, that indeed it's how can we can translate that so that they can be able to actually communicate. We don't know. We don't know what they're saying.
Well, think of it. It was almost 60 years ago when I went on this Navy science cruise, and they were trying to figure this out back then. To this day, 60 years later, here's this article that talks about all this research they're doing, and all they're coming up with is very little evidence at all scientifically of what these whales are talking about.
Yeah, that's true.
It's just discerning just a little bit about it, and they say that all this helps prove us understand the evolution of whales. Well, that makes no sense to me. It really doesn't relate at all.
But they believe in evolution.
The human heart is desperately deceitful and
Yeah.
wants to be deceived. And I think that's a big obstacle we have, but I think we're called to do it. And you're doing a good job of that. I really appreciate this. This is kind of fun. I'm looking forward to reading your book.
Good. Good.
Now,
Appreciate that.
I've been on three different whale watches, and they were really incredible experiences, all three of them. The first one was about 1991 when I took my family to Massachusetts, and we brought a boat off of Provincetown, Massachusetts, off of Cape Cod, and it went out in the middle of the ocean there, and there were actually two whales that popped up and started diving around the boat and actually came up underneath the boat. So they had to cut the engine because the whales were as curious as uh, about us as we were about them. The second time was in San Diego, where we took a whale watch off of the coast of San Diego, and we went out and saw gray whales. And they were actually mating at the times, which is um, kind of interesting. And and
That's a nice way to put it.
the third time, maybe you were with me on. No, I don't think you were with me on the 2008 time when we went to Hawaii, but we took the charter boat trip off of Kauai and where we went to the Napali coast. But in that case, they took us out to where the whales were frolicking, and we had two whales follow us in and pass us.
Well, we saw whales up in Alaska, Doug, though. We did see them there too.
Yes, we
We weren't
did.
on a
Yeah.
whale watch, but we saw quite a few whales up there. Yep.
Whales have what look like vestigial feet, and they're labeled that in textbooks over and over. And they ignore the simple fact that those are copulatory organs. You can imagine one whale mating with another whale. I can't even imagine it, so I don't know. But they're monstrous.
I got
And
a
how they
video of
position
that though.
themselves to do so is because of these so-called feet. And
Oh boy.
they have been wrong in the textbooks for decades, and they refuse to. As far as I know, they haven't changed them. But
They
indeed,
still
if you
keep it
look in
up?
the
Oh
literature in
boy.
detail, they are copulatory organs, which facilitates copulation, which is pretty important to be able to obtain the next generation.
Like new whales. Yep. Yeah, that's
Oh,
exactly right.
we're looking forward to reading your book, Jerry, and when it comes out. Thanks for joining us on Revolution Against Evolution. We'll see you next time.